in some area where the government needs to bring in legislation. He said, he's really pushing it down to a sort of personal responsibility element. He was saying, we didn't legislate to make people cough into their elbows. We didn't legislate to make people wash their hands for longer than 20 seconds. So this isn't the kind of area where you'd need any form of enforcement. It's just down to common sense. But I think now there is an acknowledgement that some form of more coherent advice or coherent information from the government is really needed on this, because the advice is that you should wear face masks in enclosed spaces such as shops or studios potentially. But I don't think people are necessarily aware of that. People aren't wearing them into supermarkets to such a great extent, because I don't think they know that this is as important as washing their hands. This is as important as other measures that they've been taking so far.
I've heard a few times this week, Micheál, coming from the government benches. That'll be something for the new government to consider, whatever the subject or topic might be. Do you think that this is something that they're just kicking down the road a little bit?
Yeah, and you think it is going to become more pertinent when the advice comes out around the 1 metre, 2 metre rule, and there is going to be developments on that next week. The Taoiseach saying in the Dáil that we do know there's work happening in government departments to look at the risks both of not reducing that 2 metre to 1 metre and of doing it. And he spoke about the 80,000 jobs in the hospitality sector that could be affected if you didn't do it. So things I think are really being teed up next week, using both medical advice and government advice to reduce that back to 1 metre. And I suppose it's at that point that the face mask will become even more necessary, because up until now the government was saying distance is better than face coverings.
Something else now that's been talked about quite a lot just in the last few hours in the Dáil are hairdressers. And, I suppose we've all been given out, particularly the girls, I suppose, about the hair and the desperate need to get to the hairdressers. But we all sort of had an idea, didn't we, that it was going to be probably, July-ish time by the time we'd get there. But really, it's a conversation that's been ramped up a lot in the Dáil this afternoon, Mary.
Yeah, I'm
What's
not
been
sure.
said?
I think it's some of the guys who are raising this, particularly in the Dáil, men.
Yeah, there's a
raising
few
this.
bouffants, all right.
Yeah,
actually.
there's a kind of tendency to blame this on the women, but it has been raised in the Dáil. The Simon Harris, again speaking about it, was saying, so as things stand, next month is when hairdressers are due to reopen, but there is speculation now that June 29th might be the date when we see hairdressers reopening and might be brought forward. I think NPHET are due to discuss that issue over the coming days. It'll be considered by government next week. So Simon Harris is saying you'll know one way or the other next week whether hairdressers can reopen or not. Kieran O'Donnell, the Fine Gael TD, is saying in the Dáil that he's seen a multitude of people walking around with their hair almost down to their knees. And also TD is saying that this is an issue that's actually being presented to them from their constituents. We often think of TDs getting, very serious issues sent into their offices and sorting out a range of issues. But they're now being asked, when are hairdressers reopening? And they want answers on that.
I can understand that. It's a very serious issue for a lot of people. It's understandable, isn't it, Micheál? But I suppose it's just one of those things that is again, probably going to be for the next government to kind of maybe decide on? Or do you think that once the decision is made, that'll be it?
I think the push is on. I think there's a widespread expectation, and there has been really since last weekend, that this probably will go forward to the 29th. It's just a matter of getting it over the line now. It's interesting that when Leo Varadkar spoke about this on the Late Late Show on the day the first roadmap was laid down, that he said he had something of a battle with Tony Holohan on getting it into that fourth phase, as it was then, to the 20th of July. So if that battle was there then, notwithstanding what's happening now, there probably will require a bit of political push to get the medical cover.
But of course it is going to have to incorporate those, the face masks like we were talking about. It's a combination of a couple of things, because protective clothing, face masks, screens, whatever it's going to take.
And the other thing is hairdressers, some of the reasons some women and men go to hairdressers is for a moment's peace, reading a magazine and having a cup of coffee. Hairdressers won't have newspapers, they won't have magazines, they'll have no reading material, and you won't get your cup of tea or coffee while you're getting your hair done. So it's going to be a completely different experience. And Simon Harris is actually saying in the Dáil that there is a mental health and well-being element to hairdressers, particularly for some older people. It's a big social element to returning to hairdressers, and other countries have acknowledged that as well in their considerations of this issue.
And it's not just hairdressers that people are going to their TDs about. Social dancing.
Yes.
It's also Frank Fionn, of course, from the constituency now of the famous Ballroom of Romance, asking the health minister about social dancing. When can that return? And for the moment, Simon Harris saying you can only do the social dance if you're at a 2 metre distance. That's the only safe type of dancing.
I don't know much about the sort of ballroom dancing maybe that Frank Fionn was talking about, but I guess you have to be a little bit closer. It could be that they just say social dancing only with the person you live with or the partner. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to government formation, because we're going to bring in a guest now on the podcast, and Green Party Senator Dan Boyle joins us on the phone. Good afternoon to you, Dan. Thanks so much for joining us now. You were there, I suppose, at the coalface in 2007, Dan, when your party was talking to Fianna Fáil at the time about government formation. I suppose take us back, Dan, to that time, and if you can relate it to what's happening at the moment, where we seem to be on the cusp of getting some form of an agreement between not two but three different parties.
Yeah, well, I'm not too sure coalface is a good analogy to use when one of the contentious issues is the 7% carbon emissions. But certainly there's significant differences between 2007 and now. There's the fact that it isn't a one-to-one party negotiation. There are two other parties there. And the negotiations is certainly looking... It's almost like trigonometry, because there are different angles that the sets of negotiators have to take into account, not only trying to persuade one particular party of a position where there's a wide convergence, but trying to triangulate it in such a way that the three parties can come to a general acceptance. So that's been one of the reasons, I think, for the delay, also in addition to the COVID-19 restrictions. But it seems that the similarity is that any set of negotiations leave the most difficult issues to the very last. And the last number of days, last week or so, has been about trying to tackle those particular issues to finalise an agreement, and that's the stage we find ourselves at now.
Are you surprised that there hasn't been a stepping away from the table, as yet anyway?
Well, we actually did that in 2007. We felt we weren't making any headway, and the act of moving away concentrated minds a bit more, and we eventually got an agreement. But I think what we've seen this time is that while the no comment on negotiations has largely been held to, there's been an element of spinning, and not so much against the other parties, but I think some of the parties, and maybe even all of the parties, have used the opportunity of making external comments to better highlight their own policy positions and say what their preferred agreed outcomes might be. So again, that tends to delay the process, but it does also help inform the process as well, in the sense that you get an element of public engagement that you don't in a usually closed process. And I'd be relatively confident that some level of agreement is going to be reached in the next number of days. But whether that is something that the respective memberships or the respective decision-making apparatus of all the parties concerned are likely to approve of is a separate question altogether.
Dan, just thinking back to 2007, one of the differences from the outside looking in is that there was a sense that time that the Greens were a small unit kind of being elevated up onto a different political level, but that you were a united force. The perception, albeit accurate or inaccurate, is that there's a sense within the Green Party that Eamon Ryan and Catherine Martin at the very least have a completely different approach, and that is heightened unquestionably by the fact that there is a leadership contest at play as well. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, I think the first part is certainly true. I mean, the ratio in 2007 between the Greens and Fianna Fáil was parliamentary memberships of 11-1. Now you're talking about the Greens to either Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael being 3-1. So you're talking about a far more significant Green presence in any potential government. And maybe part of the problem has been that the traditional parties are failing to take that into account sufficiently. There's no doubt there's a debate in the Green Party about what the right strategic approach is, whether to engage at all, whether to stand aside for a 5-year period and see whether there's a better set of circumstances. But I think the wider membership are all agreed in the sense that we have to investigate the potential and the possibilities that exist, and I think there has been a sincere attempt for that to come about, and I think everyone is engaged in a quite legitimate and sincere way that way. The leadership contest, I think, while it might be unfortunate, it's a parallel and it's a separate process, and it's something that our constitution mandates to do. If there are people in the party think we should be having a different change of direction or a change of personnel, and that's going to happen several weeks after any potential vote on a programme for government. So I think there's a need to separate the two processes rather than saying that they're one is engaged with the other. And I think that when the first vote is taken, if a first vote is taken, it'll be very much taken in that context alone.
Dan, I've got to ask you about something that's happened just this afternoon in the Dáil. Eamon Ryan has had to tweet an apology for a word that he used. He made a speech about what he calls the scourge of racism in our society, and he was quoting from an article, and this is partly now taken from the tweet of apology, and he says, "I repeated a racial slur and I was completely wrong to do so. I want to apologise for any hurt caused. I know this particular word should never be used. It was the N word. I won't repeat it here now." But it would appear that some Green Party members have taken a lot of offence to it. I know Councillor Dan Woolley has said that Eamon Ryan's comments were morally reprehensible, and some other Green Party members also taking to social media to say he shouldn't have said it at all. Do you think it's going to damage Eamon Ryan in the leadership contest?
Well, I think Eamon has apologised for the use of the word. I think everyone accepts that he was coming from a good place, and he was trying to possibly shake the complacency that we treat racism globally and even within our own society. And this is a very turbulent time in terms of racial divisions and how the scourge of racism, which actually does exist, is being dealt with both internally and throughout the world. I think there will be comment, and particularly over social media over the next couple of hours, but I don't think it has any medium-term or long-term effect. I don't think anyone who knows Eamon and knows the Green Party will kind of attribute any malice in terms of choosing to repeat a word rather than use the word in its own right. And I think there are bigger issues the party has to deal with in deciding whether or not to be in government, including the Irish context of how we deal with the ongoing problem of the inadequate system of direct provision, which continues to exist.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this afternoon. We'll say goodbye to you for now. That's former Senator from the Green Party, Dan Boyle. Just picking up, I suppose, on the comments there that he made about government formation. He's suggesting that the Green Party leadership isn't an issue that's going to affect the government formation. And as we're now kind of what appears to be on the cusp of getting some sort of an agreement, maybe it hasn't actually caused what some people said was kind of a disturbance in the negotiations.
Yeah, I don't know. But what we kind of do know is that Catherine Martin's backing of any agreement is crucial to get that 66%. And you kind of see that in the analysis done by the Irish Independent today on who would win the leadership contest, judging by their councillors solely on that. Of course, it would be a much wider vote. And that while Eamon Ryan might be slightly ahead on that, it's nowhere near the 66%. So what Catherine Martin says and Nessa Harrigan is key in all of this, but particularly Catherine Martin.
What do you think, Mary? Is what Eamon has said this afternoon, is it damaging, or is it like a bit of a storm in the teacup, like Dan has suggested, is a storm in social media maybe?
Well, I think it's certainly given those who are supportive of Catherine Martin in the party a chance to criticise him, which they're taking to Twitter in their droves to do today. That's a sort of generational divide, I think, in the party. A lot of their younger councillors and members very unhappy, and the councillor that you mentioned saying he doesn't accept the Green Party leader's apology in relation to this. In terms of the overall talks, I think Micheál is absolutely right in what those close to the talks will say, is that this deal kind of lives or dies by Catherine Martin's acceptance or the nature of her acceptance on this. It needs to have her blessing more than just her acceptance in order for her to bring a certain strong enough cohort of the party with her to support this deal. And yes, there are concerns that her her announcement that she'd be running for the leadership, just came at such a bad time in those talks. Saturday night was such an intense phase, just the intensification of the discussions just really starting on Saturday evening when this news came through that she was contesting the leadership. It sort of soured things from what I understand. People worried that that it might feed into the talks process. So her consideration around the leadership might feed into this. Now, at the same time, she says she's not going to canvass, she's not going to campaign, she's not going to comment, she's not going to do any media until such a time as the entire membership have had their say on this. So I don't think we're going to hear Catherine Martin, for example, coming out and criticising Eamon Ryan in relation to these comments because she has said that she will not engage in any active campaigning for the leadership until a government deal is either A, agreed and B, voted on by members.
Maybe it's an advantage to the Green Party if in the sense that it's Catherine Martin ultimately that will have to rubber stamp this deal. And there is always a feeling that Eamon Ryan as a negotiator perhaps maybe is a little bit too polite, and of course is clearly of the view, and there are several in the Green Party, that getting into government is the key thing because it's in there that you can influence policy. Catherine Martin and others believe that you need to absolutely lay down what you're going to achieve in there, which perhaps is a bit idealistic anyway, because as the Labour Party know from 2011, you can have a great and well-written programme for government, but ultimately it's the financial resolutions on budget day that will decide whether or not that programme can be implemented. And I do have one other point. Programme for governments are very important, but when you think when it comes to the order of business and questions that politicians try to ask repeatedly of governments, they can never table a question on a programme for government, because despite its elevated status at this moment when you're trying to form a government, it really isn't quite the document. I think that it's budgets and it's finance.
But that is part of the problem for the Green Party, because people who've been involved in negotiations of programme for governments in the past, or coalition governments, would say ideological
this is what we
purity is a bit of an issue. You have to allow some leeway, allow a bit of fudging here and there. But a lot of these younger members that I refer to in the Green Party, very ideologically or idealistically driven, they want detail. They want to see in black and white what's going to happen. They don't want to see, a fudge or a sort of, we leave this in a sort of general sense and see how it plays out down the road. Bigger issues in the past, like the protection of life issue in previous programme for governments, was sort of left as something that an incoming government could work its way around rather than a very decisive issue in a programme for government. But these younger members, they want to see detail, they want policies in black and white, they want to know what they're voting on.
Sorry, just one final point. It's ironic too that the big sticking point in the last programme for government, the one that took days, was one of the things that didn't happen at all. That was the Judicial Appointments Bill that took days to finalise and negotiate and ultimately failed.
Yeah, that's right. We remember. So look, just finally then, if we don't get to the 66% of the Green Party membership agreeing to this programme for government, it's belly up.
Yeah.
It's general election?
Well, I don't know. I think Micheál Martin has 5 minutes. Some people say to ring Mary Lou McDonald. Some people say he won't need the 5 minutes because she'll have rung him anyway. Or could Jim O'Callaghan be at his door within 2 minutes? I think that kind of scenarios. Or could it go back to the independents?
But it's all to happen in the next week.
Yeah, and there are some within Fine Gael. There are a minority who say that a middle of July election can't be ruled out.
We didn't even get to things like childcare, maternity provision, and what's happening tomorrow with the Cabinet. But look, keep following all of us, because I'm sure we'll bring you all the details. And Cabinet will be meeting tomorrow. We'll be hearing from the Minister for Education about potential summer provision for special needs. So lots, of course, still happening on the normal sort of day-to-day business of the Dáil. But obviously, government formation is the very exciting thing. So look, thanks very much for tuning in to the Your Politics podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a review and join us again. But from me, Maggie Doyle, Micheál Lehane and Mary Regan, thank you very much for listening.